Welcome back to Performance Lab, the podcast where we explore the science and strategies that help leaders perform at their best physically, mentally, and emotionally. Today, I'm joined by Stephen Morris. Steve is a certified EOS implementer and an executive coach who works with high-performing executives and entrepreneurs, helping them shift their mindset and identity so they can live with more clarity, confidence, and calm. We're going to dive into something Stephen calls inner mental stance. It's the lens you carry through every part of your life. Some stances empower you and some hold you back, but the powerful part is that we can learn to shift that. So, Stephen, let's dive in and let's begin with mindset.
Yeah. Thanks for having me on your podcast, Mike. I'm keen to talk about it.
Absolutely.
So mindset to me, I work with high-performing leaders. I work with entrepreneurs building businesses. I work with executives at all levels within organizations. And, the thing is that we have these external circumstances that are cropping up in the business with people, with clients, with the economy, all of these external circumstances. And of course, my clients, the people I'm working with, are trying to figure out like how to navigate their way through these external circumstances. And the symptoms, right, if we can sort of start off at the surface level and focusing on those external circumstances, we can have a conversation about that and we can come up with some tactical things to deal with the external circumstances. But ultimately, what I really find is reverse engineering back to the things that we want to have in our life come from the thoughts, the feelings, the things that we do in our life. And that comes from our mindset, who we're being and what's going on internally. And so I find it much more effective when we can kind of start the conversation off with really kind of what's going on from a mindset perspective. And then that will lead to making more effective actions with the external circumstances. So it starts with mindset.
I was thinking about, I'm a more on the MBTI, I'm an ENFJ.
Mm-hmm.
And so really living in that intuitive feeling space. And I think as entrepreneurs, it's easy when we talk about mindset to get in. I think mindset doesn't always translate to just logical, right? There's probably a heavy underlying foundation of an emotional state. And I mean, all the things that you talked about, all the chaos internally and externally and within the business and within the world affects us emotionally. And how does emotional regulation and intelligence play into mindset when we're talking about this type of entrepreneur?
Yeah, well, it's a tremendously difficult thing, I think, but ultimately very important to kind of recognize and master in many ways, because I think we've all sort of probably been in work situations where somebody is dysregulated emotionally, right? Yelling, right? That sort of thing. And if I think back over my career, I've seen instances like that, and it's just, it's not effective, right? 30 years ago, command and control kind of used to be the way leadership, and management was done. It doesn't fly anymore. People don't accept that. So my point in all of this is it really behooves leaders and the people I work with to sort of recognize, well, we just can't let our emotions, fly free in a workplace situation. So what happens, right, when some external circumstance triggers you, right? And I've been there, I know it myself, right? It's not something that you can logically always kind of control right at the beginning, right? When you sort of, something triggers you and you feel the emotion comes up from inside you. The key, the ninja trick in my mind is to be able to recognize what's happening and to create a little bit of space, right? As Viktor Frankl talks about, between stimulus and response. And in that space, to be able to choose a more effective, a more useful reaction or more useful action to take that's not just purely reacting to what's coming up inside. And so simple but not easy, right?
Right.
And just like anything that you work on with your clients, Michael, and I work on with my clients, it's about training, right? I mean, we can't just go leap on the bike and go run, do a triathlon out of the gate, right? We have to train and got to build up the muscles to be able to do that. And it's exactly the same with emotional control and emotional regulation is you've got to actually practice and build up the muscle to be able to harness that emotional feeling and then practice creating a little bit of space so we can choose more effective actions.
I heard an adage recently that the difference between easy and difficult is that we know how to do it, something along those lines, right? And when we talk about, use the phrase inner mental stance, and can you unpack that a little bit and what that looks like, and then some examples of useful inner stances and maybe unhelpful inner stances, and then the third thing is moving from one that when you're in a unhelpful inner stance, how do you move so we can get really tactical and help people make it easy.
Yeah.
I mean, it's never easy, but let's, you said it's simple, but not easy, but let's give them some tools.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, so I think the concept of an inner mental stance, we always have one. And so, the sports analogy, once again, of course, is, when you're about to do about any sort of athletic activity, your feet are on the ground and you choose your appropriate stance to be able to harness your body's power to, launch off or do whatever, swing the bat, hit the ball, run out of the starting blocks. So, a physical stance is helping us choose, the most effective action that we're going to take. So in a mental stance, the parallel is we always have a stance that's set for those external circumstances that are coming up. And so what I mean by this is you asked me to unpack it, how do we see the world, right? How do we see the world as part of our inner mental stance? So double clicking on that, the next level down, well, do we see the world as a world of abundance and that there is enough and there is plenty out there for us to go get, particularly in the entrepreneurial sense? Or do we see the world as a world of scarcity, that there's not enough, right? And how that might show up, right, on a sort of tactical day-to-day basis is in a business, we lose a client. So the inner mental stance of abundance is, okay, we lost that client. There's plenty more out there. Let's get after it and go find them. Or an inner mental stance of scarcity is, oh my gosh, we lost a client. Well, I'm going to go out of business. Whose fault it is? Is it, I got to call that client up. I got to get him back. There's just, you can go down a spiral with that mental stance. I was working with some clients a little while ago where they were kind of in that space, unfortunately. There were a number of external circumstances that were really impeding the growth of the business. And so the conversation was around, are we going to maybe have to let go of staff? Are we going to have to reduce salaries? And because they were in that world of scarcity. And so instead we sort of worked to move over to a world of abundance. And what are the other business lines that you could get into? What are the other opportunities? And, spiral up from there. So that's the sort of the first part about it, is how do you see the world? The second part that I see and work on with my clients is how do you see other people, right? Because typically I'm working with a business owner and leadership team. So how do you see other people? Do you fundamentally see other people are doing their best, assuming good intent? People are showing up. People don't, get out of bed in the morning wanting to come screw things up at work, right? But, the less useful in a mental stance is, maybe assuming that people aren't doing their best, that people don't care, right? That people are out to get you, that those sorts of things. So once again, that inner mental stance really affects how people show up. And so another example would be, sort of water cooler conversations and, are you included in those or not, or what's sort of happening around those water cooler conversations? And the whole subject of trust, comes up in a team. And so somebody who has in a mental stance of, I don't trust, or I'm not being included, or they're out to get me, would interpret seeing, a couple of people chatting over in the, around the water cooler as, oh my gosh, what's happening over there? Versus having a more useful inner mental stance of seeing people doing their best as well. Maybe they're over there, discussing how to solve a problem, right? And it's just kind of that mental framing, that inner mental stance just shifts everything. And then the final component is, of course, how do I see myself, right? That inner mental stance. And what I see with a lot of the sort of hard charging entrepreneurial clients that I work with is, we're not in large businesses here. We don't have committees that are, going through every single decision. I work with entrepreneurs who have to make decisions in their business day in and day out. And then they, wake up at 2:00 in the morning and they're like, oh my gosh, did I make the right decision yesterday? Am I the right person to be leading this business? Am I good enough to be able to take this business to where it needs to go to? So that inner mental stance of how they see themselves, of course, affects, how they're feeling about themselves and then the actions and things they're going to take in the business. So those three areas, how do you see the world? How do you see others? How do you see yourself? Are all inner mental stances. And as you talked about before, that can be effective or ineffective.
So in that last part, you alluded to maybe some self-doubt. Am I good enough? And I wonder if it could also go to the other extreme, too confident, overly confident.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember back when I was in high school, actually went to a soccer camp, and they said the difference between someone who's confident and someone who's cocky, maybe a bit overconfident, is the confident player says, there's no one who trains harder than me. And the cocky player says, there's no one who trains as hard as me, so that you're at the top and not recognizing that somewhere in the world right now, there's someone who's just as good as you are. And so I wonder if you've dealt with leaders who may be a bit overly confident.
No, it's a very good point. I think there's something about that vulnerability, and I guess in our world is sort of looking for those qualities of being humbly confident. And I think that putting those two together is sort of getting to what you're talking about, which is humbly confident is, okay, I know my stuff. I've done the work, but yes, there are probably people out there that are better than I am. I don't know everything, but it has that sort of curiosity about it, like being able to ask questions. And this is sort of such an important facet as well about being a great leader is being that person who asks questions instead of, I think, as you're talking about, being cocky or overconfident. And that's where find the person who's, pointing the finger, directing people, telling people, what to do and how to do it. And it ultimately ends up with people opting out and they don't want to work for somebody like that.
Yeah. I want to dive into the US side. And for those who are not familiar with the US, could you just give a little bit of a background so that when we're talking about the integrator and the visionary and the rocks and these kinds of things, it has some meaning?
Absolutely. Yeah. So EOS is the Entrepreneurial Operating System, and it's just a complete system of a simple set of practical tools that I come and implement and help a business owner and leadership team put into the business. And these tools are fundamentally helping that leadership team with three main things that we call vision, traction, and healthy. So vision from the aspect of, let's just figure out what the vision for this business is. Where are we going? How are we going to get there? Because so often when I start working with a group, I've got 5 or 6 people around the table with 5 or 6 different visions about where they think the business should be going. So let's get on the same page about that. And then the traction piece is the discipline, the accountability, the let's do the things that you say you want to do to make that vision come to reality. And then healthy it's almost my favorite part of this, which is working together as a healthy, functional, cohesive leadership team, because sometimes they're not. So we put a set of tools in place that are really kind of the blocking and tackling, the how does a team work together to get on the same page with their vision, do the things they say they want to do, and have some fun while they're doing it.
Excellent. I was just listening to another podcast that was talking about broadly motivation, but it was kind of stepping through and I wonder if, well, he was talking about the first stage is inspiration and then motivation, and then, well, that's great, you're fired up, but then what? Right? Mm-hmm. You need a plan. And when you were talking about vision and traction, I saw a little bit of parallel maybe between inspiration, motivation with the vision, and then traction is actually having a plan, implementing the plan, and then I don't have a parallel for healthy. He didn't talk about anything, a third thing. We like rules of three, but that's in comedy, and this isn't. This is a drama. So does that? I wonder if that does resonate. How inspiration, and motivation are weaved into the vision piece.
Yes, no, absolutely. I think it's a lot of people ask me, like, what's your definition of leadership? And the one that resonates most with me, that I've sort of kept, comes from Seth Godin, who's a very prolific author, particularly around marketing. He talks about this sort of a leader is somebody who's pointing to the horizon and saying, that's where we're going, but I don't know how to get there, follow me. And there's a whole sort of, to me, that vision of the leader knows, right, has the inspiration, that's where we're going, there's the flag planted on the horizon, has the humility to realize I can't get there by myself, and I'm not actually sure how to get there, but I've got a team. And so the inspiration and motivation is team, like, let's go, right? And let's go together. There's that commonly said phrase, right? If you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go farther, go together. Right. And that aspect of really, the visionary leader of a business needing to set that inspiring vision, and then the motivation of helping their people see their place, that there is a place in this vision where you can help. Because I think, once again, assuming the best of people, right? Assuming good intent, people want to come help. People roll out of bed in the morning wanting to come to work and solve problems and make the world a better place, right? And so allowing people to have a place in achieving a vision is tremendously motivating.
Yeah, I remember hearing at a conference in January about having a vision broad enough that other people can see themselves in it, and not so narrow to as a small business or a solopreneur. Even I want to be the biggest. Like, it's hard to get behind when it's a selfish goal or selfish vision. But if you're like, I want to change, I think talking about the world and other people and the self, those three steps, kind of the vision probably starts with at least other people, and then the world. That I want to change the lives of this number of people versus I want to make this amount of money so we can go buy a yacht or whatever.
Yes. No, absolutely. I mean, I think sometimes companies do set quantitative visions around money and revenue and things like that, but I think the more effective ones really do help the people in the company kind of see their place in achieving something. So being able to, as one set of my clients a few years ago was sort of ruminating around, setting a financial goal for the business was one thing, but what did that financial goal enable? Well, they wanted to build a community center. They wanted to give back to the community in a very tangible way. So the financial goal for the business was an enabler that really got to the passionate goal that they had, which is we want to make our community a better place. And I think then generally most of the people in the business can see themselves and, like, I can't wait for us to be able to build that community center. That's going to be cool, right? And to see their place in it versus making a $20 million business or a $25 million business. Sometimes people can have difficulty in saying, well, it's great, you're going to make $20 million. What's in it for me?
Right. As a visionary and an idea generator, I don't know if I just attract or gravitate towards other visionaries, but I find my perception is there are vastly more visionaries, and maybe they're not even visionaries, but people without clear, they benefit most from having that plan and the traction, and and it seems like, in my experience, maybe 2/3 visionaries in the world and 1/3 or maybe less, like very few people who think in that step-by-step, eliminating options versus we could do this and we could do this. And it just leads, I think, in my experience and people I've worked with, to just haphazard. I mean, even in the fitness world, trying something for a little bit and then not having any metrics around it or KPIs or, how do we know it did work or it didn't work, and changing, 5 things at once. And
right.
So is that just my perception, or is that true that there are a lot more people who are more in that idea generation base and not so much in the tactical getting things done?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, Michael. I wonder if you might just be perhaps surrounding yourself, as you said,
Okay.
with visionary people. It's an interesting thing. And there's actually been a book written about this, and I wish I had it at the top of my mind. But the basic premise behind the book is that it's more about the sort of the entrepreneurial drive, that it's actually, there's some genetic basis to it. And the research and the point of the book was something about a certain sector of the population. It's about their dopamine system, if I'm kind of remembering what the book was trying to say. Because dopamine's the molecule of motivation, right? If I've got that right. And so there's something about the entrepreneurial drive that people want to keep sort of creating businesses and new ideas and moving forward because they're not getting enough, or they're not getting that motivation, the dopamine satiated as much as others. I honestly don't know, the real, research basis of that contention, but it's a good theory, and it can be a working sort of model of this idea that there's a certain person that is wired to be an entrepreneur, and I do see that with my clients, and I do see that there's a certain mindset, right, about that entrepreneur that is looking at the horizon and let's get there. That'll be really cool. No idea how to do it. Let's try this. Let's do this. I read this book here. I'm going to talk to that person there. I listened to a podcast. You're right. It's, they can be a little scattered. And so what we in our world call rocket fuel is when we can get that visionary paired up with an integrator, which is, so one person is outwardly focused, looking at the horizon, pointing, saying that's where we're going. The other person is inwardly focused and figuring out okay, how do we actually get this done, right? How do we execute that vision? There's great examples, like Walt Disney was a visionary. Roy Disney, his brother, was the integrator. The two of them working together, created this incredible corporation that's truly affected, millions of people's lives. And in EOS and the work that I do, we want to be able to sort of really get that pairing working well, because when it does work well, as I said, it's rocket fuel. What I see, though, is sometimes in smaller businesses, we might have a visionary, but they're also sitting in the integrator's seat. And that's kind of that's starting to tear them apart, because their natural wiring is just not in that I'm keeping the trains running on time sort of mentality. And so one of the first steps when we have a situation like that is just to recognize it. That's cool. And then to your point, okay, what's the plan to get you, visionary, out of the integrator's seat and get somebody else in here who's going to take care of all of those little down in the weeds details, so you can be freed up to execute in your unique ability, looking at the horizon, saying, where are we going? So it's a definite thing for sure. I'm not sure, maybe overall in the world, there are a lot of people who dream about things that they would like to do. The true entrepreneurs are the ones who start taking action. And then if we can pair that up with somebody who truly can put the systems in place, then that's when we have magic happen, I think, in business.
Yeah. You mentioned leaning into your unique ability. And I think I've seen over the last few decades, friends who have been entrepreneurs, I don't know if we had the language of staying in your zone of genius and these kinds of things, 30 years ago, maybe there was, I wasn't aware of it, but, doing things that you can do, but you could also delegate, right? But there's sometimes, especially with founders, I find, holding on to, whether it's conscious or unconscious micromanaging, or, maybe it manifests in a slightly different way, but just doing things that are limiting themselves and their business and maybe exhausting them. And, they're pulling all-nighters still and things. And could you speak to that if that's, common with the people you work with and how you can kick that and jumpstart, hiring? I mean, in this day and age, again, that wasn't common 20 years ago, but VAs and even AI and automations and things could take things off someone's plate so they can really harness their unique ability and stay in that zone of genius.
Yeah, no, it's absolutely, it's a huge part of the magic of freeing up a business and taking it to the next level. And that's freeing up the energy, particularly of the visionary, but this applies to everybody in the business. And so, for me, it really comes back to, I hear so many people talking about, like, I don't have enough time, right? And so a little sort of slight reframing of this, once again, mindset and a mental stance is, what if we look at this in terms of energy instead of time? And what are the things that truly energize you? Right, that in that zone of unique ability or genius or whatever is the things that you love doing and you are really great at. Because when you're doing those things, you're getting energy, right? Versus the things that you don't like doing and you're not good at, or there might be some things that you are good at, but you still don't like doing them, right? Those are the things that tend to suck away at your energy. Those are the things that you procrastinate around. Those are the things that you drag, cause you to sort of like drag your feet into. One of the things for me is just, hey, doing social media posts, like recording videos of myself hasn't been in my, zone of unique ability. I'm learning, I'm getting better. But the point is, so in EOS, we go through this whole exercise of really looking at what are the things you love doing and are really great at. Let's get those things written down. What are the things that, you're procrastinating around, you don't like doing, you drag away at your energy? Let's get those things written down. And to your point, let's take all of those things that you don't like doing and you're not good at and get those delegated. Find a VA, find somebody else in the business, or even let's these days figure out how we can get AI to automate some of those things so they're off your plate. And my clients who do this report just like feeling like I just got a massive weight lifted off my chest, right? Because I just got all of these things I don't like doing off of my plate and somebody else is taking care of them. But one of the key things we've got to do along the way is that delegation is difficult, and call it letting go of the vine, right? To be able to allow somebody else to be able to take something and go execute it. And so one of the things that we tend to find is that people won't delegate if they feel in their gut that the person that they're trying to give something to doesn't get it, doesn't want it, or doesn't have the capacity to do it. So this GWC, gets it, want it, has the capacity to do it, is a tool from EOS. Gets it means, do they fundamentally understand what you're asking them to do? Do you see the neurons in their brain connecting? Their eyes light up. Got it. Okay, they get it. Do they want it, right? Do they have a smile on their face when you're giving them the task? And do they have the capacity? Meaning, do they have the talent, skills, expertise, and time also to do the job really well? And when in your gut you feel like they GWC what you're asking them to do, you'll be very happy to delegate it to them. If you don't feel they GWC, then you end up holding it. And so, the very common talk track could be, damn it, I'm just going to do it myself. Right? Have you ever said something like that? Right? I'm just going to do it myself. It'll be faster if I do it. That sort of thinking means you're at the office at 7:00 on a Friday night. You're coming in at 9:00 on a Saturday morning, right? And they are playing golf or on their bike, hiking in the mountains and having fun, right? And so there's something wrong with this situation. We need to, be able to shine a light on that and find people who get it, want it, have the capacity so you can delegate and free yourself up. And then you'll have energy to really, truly drive the business forward. So this is one of the things that I work on with my clients, enabling this to happen.
Is there a step that precedes or intercedes that of identifying whether things actually need to be done? When you mentioned social media, I thought if I'm actually going to try this out. I think in a month or so, I'll be traveling a lot in October. And so I was thinking, what if I just completely stop doing a few things? And, it's like when you're sick and you go to work and it's like the world keeps spinning. What if I stop all social media and like several other activities, and I just don't do it all. And I create that space, and I'm in that state as you're, just being present and just in, having that complete release, right? Not doing it less, like not going from every day to 3 days a week or something, but completely eliminating it. And I think, having that delineation between the things that are kind of need to get done or the things that are nice to get done, or, feeling like you're doing a lot and you're really busy and you're really being productive, but then you fool yourself and you look at what you're actually doing and it didn't really produce any tangible results,
Sure.
So could you do things in a, shift all of that time and energy and effort to one thing that could really propel your business instead of spending all this time and activity that's not really fruitful?
No, I mean, you make a very fair point. I guess what comes up for me is I listen as part of, one of the things I work on with my clients is systemizing their business. And so, for example, there's a marketing system, right, that generates leads. And then as we sort of referenced at the very beginning of the conversation, having KPIs, having a scorecard, measuring data about are we actually making progress? Like if we do these actions, are they generating the results that we need? Right. And this is a whole part of the system that we put in place with EOS is measuring those things. So making sure that, we are, looking at what's the right metric, numbers of leads or numbers of qualified leads or numbers of leads that ultimately end up converting. So I would think, if there is a system in the business and we've gone through the steps on that system and we know that, well, if I want to get X number of, customers or clients in my business, I've got to do a certain number of phone calls, and those phone calls have got to come from, qualified leads. And to get qualified leads, I've got to do, a number of talks or social media posts or whatever that is, whatever that system is. If that system is truly the right system, then I would be concerned about just stopping it for a month, right? But, so if the system's the right system, maybe delegating it to somebody could be the thing to do. But then I think you're also making another really great point, and my clients ask this too. Are we working on the right stuff, right? Because we can get very into the weeds of, oh my gosh, I've got to get 3 LinkedIn posts up. I got to do my Facebook stuff. And that's all down in the weeds. And your point is a good one, which is when do we take a step back and figure out, is this the right stuff? So one of the tools that I teach my clients is taking a clarity break. And this is unbelievably the easiest thing to do and the hardest thing to get my hard charging entrepreneurs to do. And the instructions for a clarity break are get away from your computer, turn your phone off, go to a coffee shop or somewhere inspiring, sit down with a blank sheet of paper in front of you, just take a few deep breaths, and then just start feeling into what's coming up. What's coming up with your energy, your work, your relationships, how you're feeling with your energy, you're getting the right amount of sleep, nutrition, exercise, all those sorts of things. And, to your point, this is the big step back to be strategic, right? To be able to really see, ultimately my Facebook marketing thing isn't generating the leads I want. I need to stop it, right? But getting people to take that time, they feel guilty. I'm saying go sit in a coffee shop and just think for 2 hours, and they won't do it because in the US, I think there's just this culture of if I'm not at my desk grinding away, I'm not working. And what if the most important thing you can do for your business is to go take 2 hours and think? Would be the magic.
Yeah. Do you work with entrepreneurs outside of the US? Do you see any differences? You're originally from New Zealand, correct? Mm-hmm. Do you find any, or even people who have come here from other places and are kind of used to a different culture where they're not grinding all the time?
Yeah. I don't currently have clients outside of the US, but I've certainly worked at various times in my life, and I'm from New Zealand as well. But, I used to work with a lot of clients in Europe, for example. And so in France, or Germany, if you suggest, we're going to try to get something done in the month of August, good luck, because everybody's taking 6 weeks off to go to the south of France, right, and sit on the beach to recharge. It's a little bit the same in New Zealand from because it's summertime down there during Christmas, right? So sort of from about the week before Christmas all the way through to the middle of January, people are on their summer vacation. But I think, to your point, there's sort of, I do see in other cultures more of that emphasis on, I need to re-energize, I need to take a little bit of step back, or there's other things that are just as important, if not more important, which is relationship with family, kids, parents, spouse, friends, that sort of thing.
Yeah. When we were talking earlier, I was thinking of I think Tony Robbins popularized it, the three S's of state, story, and strategy, and how important starting with the state rather than starting with the strategy, right? If you're in desperate need of this break we're describing and trying to develop a strategy, it's probably not going to be as good as it could be if you take those 2 hours to go to the coffee shop or again, wherever it is. I mean, for me, maybe it's in the middle of the woods on my mountain bike, right? Not a coffee shop. Maybe it's solo time versus, even though I'm an extrovert, being alone and really quiet and in a space that inspires me, and then sort of develop, seeing where that state takes me and I've had so many, it's kind of those shower thoughts, right, that are those are that inspiration when you allow your subconscious to override your working conscious brain.
Yeah, well, I think it's I've been doing a kettlebell training program for the last 9 months of my life, and it's phased, right? And I go through 3 weeks of loading, 3 weeks of progressive increasing load, and then we do a deload week for my body to recover. But it's not just even my physical body, like there's a mental aspect of it that I'm seeing in this training program, because week after week after week of increasing load, is a real tough thing, right? I can even feel myself on that 3rd week of loading, like, oh my gosh, I gotta go do this workout and it's gonna be painful, right? I can feel that coming up, right? And then I look forward to deload week, because I can recover. And I just think that same thing, like we don't have that same phasing. I'm not seeing that same phasing in business. It's just ends, it's week after week after week after week of increasing load.
That's right. I have a question that I see a lot with people I've interacted with over the last decade, and it's founders who have had very successful companies and have exited and then lose their identity. And they have, I think we would say they have a negative inner stance for a bit, because they're, it'd be a ship without a sail, just floating around. And I use that analogy because you started your career in sailing. I don't know if that is a question for the EOS side or a question for the other side, but what would you say to someone who may still be in that, searching for the next thing and, without a problem to solve, I think is the way they describe it, right? They don't feel useful. They don't feel like they have purpose in their life.
No, it's a very real thing that I do work on with my clients, and where I see it coming up at all sorts of different areas. I mean, particularly, we've had a founder who's been sort of head down, running like heck in the business, and they finally built the business up. And then part of what I'm doing on the EOS side is, getting that person to elevate. Right now, you need to be out of the weeds and you need to be the visionary for the business. And that feels weird to them. You need to be sitting down and thinking in some quiet space about where the business is going. It feels weird. But then what comes up in that is, well, what is my purpose? What should I be doing? What does excite me, for the next leg of the journey? And so part of how we tackle that is, once again, sort of creating a little bit of space to really sort of tap into what are the things that you are passionate about, what are the things that you do care about, what is the, what's the change that you'd like to be seeing in the world and making in the world, and trying to, sort of pull out some of those threads, but, that whole sort of cascade of what I'll call the I'll be happy when syndrome, which is, a lot of us hinge our future happiness contingent on external future events. I'll be happy when I get that new job, new client, new car, whatever, because then I'll be able to, get a new car, I'll be able to go for a drive in the mountains, and then I'll be happy. So my point in all of this is kind of reverse engineering. The things that we ultimately want to have in our life come from the actions that we take in the world. Those actions we take in the world come from our thoughts and our feelings. Those things come from, in a stance, who we're being. So that's where I take that conversation, is ultimately, what's that change that you'd like to have in the world? And that's reverse engineer that down to, well, who would you have to be to bring that about? So if somebody's, seeing, well, I want to build a larger legacy. That's one of my clients is talking about, like, I'd like to leave a legacy for my kids, right? Finally, after, heads down the business for so long, coming up for air, and then really looking at, what is that bigger purpose? And, okay, well, if we start once again sort of really capturing that purpose and crystallizing it into maybe the next vision for the next stage of their life. And then once again, sort of having created that vision, then we can bring that down to the ground and to the strategy, systems, and tactics that will allow that vision to come to reality. It might mean fundamentally shifting their identity from being an in the weeds doer in the business to being a mentor, to being a philanthropist, to being a legacy builder, lots of different aspects of that.
When you talk about purpose, one of the things that comes to mind are words like your calling or your vocation, right? And I like to say something that you can't not do, that not something you're inspired to do, you think is a good idea, right? But something that in your spirit, in your bones, you feel out of alignment if you're not doing that thing. And I think that's easier said than done, especially in some of the groups we're in where, it is, I'll be happy when, but there never is. And I know many guys who, their first benchmark was, I want to grow my business to, or my net worth, right, to, $5 million and then $10 million and then $100 million. And I want to be a billionaire, and it's like, do you even like what you're doing? Is this why are you doing other than this, some sort of external, probably status or power or something? Is purpose, to bring it back, is purpose around sort of that vocation and calling, or not necessarily?
No, I think it definitely taps into something deeper, and when it's effective, it is anchored into your sort of core identity. So a client I've worked with for a while, we've gone through several stages of this, but ultimately the latest one has really sort of been able to look at all of these different areas in his life, and then then come back and sort of tap into himself and, like, what's the commonality across these things that I do like to do and am motivated to do, and ultimately coming to himself and seeing himself as being a creator. And he's also very faith-based as well. And so he's sort of tying together his business, his family, his faith into his identity. And then from that, being able to say, okay, yes, what is my purpose? From, if I am this person, then, crystallizing my purpose from being a creator to go out and create a legacy in the world, to be able to create wealth, but for a purpose of doing good things. So we were able to go through all of that and then anchor it back to, his identity and his being in a way that really kind of, I think the outcome for him was he now felt like he was really at his core and more coherent and aligned with what he was doing and why he was doing the things in his life. He now had a core that he could come back to and touch and say, I am doing these things because this is who I am being. And it started to make sense, right, of all of various business endeavors and other endeavors that he was involved in his life. So it was a great experience to kind of be able to go through that and then to tap back into truly his authentic inner core that drove everything.
When you're shifting identity like that, you have to, even if you're pretty clear on where you're going, you have to leave behind, you have to let go of your current identity, which I think is with anything, whether it's, a couch that you love or,
Yeah.
anything, it's like the possession of yourself. You have to let go of this possession. Do you have any advice on doing that? Because I think it's something that in order to grow, it's necessary. It's a requirement for growth. And it's really easy for a lot of people to stay in that safe space
Mm.
and not be able to just cut the cord on that and lean into their future self.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of aspects to what you're talking about there. But what I experience with myself and working with my clients is it's a constant daily practice. So once again, this is sort of getting in the reps to be able to shift. And to your point, it's a very good one, being able to sort of let go of who I've seen myself being in the past. Sometimes some of those things require or at least what I've experienced in the work that I do, a process of self-forgiveness. In other words, some of the things that we kind of have attached to or have molded our identity have not been very useful ways of seeing ourselves. And so we need to be able to let go of them. So there's sort of one practice is affirmations. I feel that, and certainly what I've experienced, that affirmations layered on top of something that's still there can kind of be a little bit like water off a duck's back. They don't kind of really stick. And I think one of the ways that you can detect that is if you're sort of doing your Tony Robbins affirmations or whatever, and you're kind of like there's still that little voice in the back of your mind saying, no, you're not. We've got a problem there. That's it's not being effective. There's a process I go through in my coaching, and I've been through it myself, that to be able to kind of look at that little voice in the back of your head when it's saying like, no, you're not. And like, well, what's that judgment? What's that about? And going through a process of forgiving that, the self-forgiveness and letting it go, and then really turning to and finding the real truth about who you are at your core. And then when we can let go of something, to your point, when we can let go of something, it creates some space for a new truth to surface. So I found that to be particularly effective, but it is a constant daily practice. And so how that shows up in my own life is I get up in the morning, and unless I'm rushing off to the airport or something, I start my day with saying my blessings, like really being able to, look out at the world and the things that I'm thankful for, and starting off with that place of gratitude. Times in the past, if I wake up in the morning, the phone's next to my bed, you open up the phone, you immediately into your email, and, stuff goes sideways so quickly. So I don't do that anymore. My phone's not even in the room with me. I start my day without that. I start my day from a place of gratitude and blessings. And then I have a set of declarations that I go through. A declaration is I am declaring that this is my stance. This is where I'm coming from today. The day might go sideways, pear-shaped, whatever, but this is where I'm starting my day. I'm declaring this. And from that, I'm going to operate from that position. And I found that to be a really effective way of just starting my day off on the right compass heading.
Excellent. Well, as we wrap up, I want to be sure to give you an opportunity to tell people how to find you and to work with you. But before we do that, I want to step into my world. You mentioned doing kettlebell training and sort of what a pause in the morning, maybe I heard something like a gratitude practice in a way, being, thankful for the good things that are happening in your life right now. What other daily or regular practices I know you also grow a lot of your own food right on your property.
Mm-hmm.
What else? Tell me more about Steve from a wellness standpoint outside of the business world, just in your own life. What kind of practices do you do?
Well, energy, work, relationships, as I was talking about in that clarity break. And so energy is everything, I think. And managing energy is about, trying to get good sleep. So I try to get to bed early at night and make sure I need like 8 hours from the time I turn the light off to the time my alarm goes off. Otherwise, I'm starting to feel like I'm shortchanging myself. Nutrition is a huge thing. So yes, we live on a farm here in Colorado. We're growing our own food, and we're creating a permaculture food forest. So we have fruit trees and berry bushes and vegetable gardens, chickens and ducks, and are really kind of creating an ecosystem, because if we're not putting the healthy molecules inside us. I don't think we're helping ourselves show up with the right energy. Exercise, of course, is huge. I'm a big believer in Peter Attia's concept of the centenarian Olympics, meaning defining when you're 100 years old, what do you want to be doing? Do you see yourself, being able to lift your suitcase and put it in the overhead bin of the aircraft? Can you bend down and pick up your great-great-grandchild as they come barreling into your shins? Defining those things at 100, and then, we all decline, but we can, I think, choose the rate of decline and the starting point of the decline. In Peter Attia's world, that point is probably way higher than most of us would like it to be. In our 50s or 60s or whatever. But I think it's a very useful construct for me to think about. I better get up and do my workout today because it's setting that point and it's setting the slope. And I want to be around for my, both my grandkids and my great grandkids and all of the exciting things in my life. And I think the mindset around that is agency, right? The fact that I can choose, that I can make a difference, that I can do some actions that will result in something better happening in the world. So I think those are very huge things.
Thank you very much for spending time with me. As I said, if people want to find you as an executive coach or an EOS implementer, what's the best way to reach out?
So my website is at stevemorriscoaching.com. It's pretty straightforward. So people can find me there or can reach out by email at steve@stevemorriscoaching.com. That's be always very happy just to have a chat with folks about, where they are, where they'd like to get to in their lives and their business, and see if we can find the resources that help maybe, open a few doors so they can make progress.
Excellent. Well, Steve, thanks so much for sharing your insights today.
Thanks for having me on the show. It's great. It's a good conversation, Michael. Thanks.
Absolutely. For those of you listening, think about your own inner stance. How are you seeing yourself, others, and the world? And is that stance serving you or limiting you? If you want to learn more about Stephen and his work, I'll link the resources in the show notes as well. And as always, if today's episode sparks something for you, share it with a friend, a colleague who would benefit. That's how we grow this community of high performers. Until next time, keep pushing your edge, stay curious, and live with purpose.
Thanks, Michael.
Thank you. You've been listening to Performance Lab. I'm Dr. Michael Donovan, reminding you that peak performance is a journey, not a destination. For more cutting-edge insights and actionable tips, subscribe to our podcast and follow us on social media. Until next time, keep pushing your limits and stay tuned to the Performance Lab.